Hi guys, it's Geekonomics here, and today I'm bringing you a video, another one in the series indeed, on the spectrum of competition. And today we are going to be looking at a natural monopoly. You'll see in the videos which I've done previously we've considered monopoly, but we haven't yet considered the whole notion of a natural monopoly. So you'll know, I'm sure, having looked at monopoly, that there are various things which will give a firm some sort of monopoly power. And I've just listed a few of them here for your attention. So first of all, it might be because of some type of brand loyalty, gives a firm a dominant position in the marketplace, and hence they have that ability to set price higher than they possibly would otherwise be able to, and hence earn exorbitant and extortionate abnormal profits. So that's brand loyalty. Secondly, there's a whole notion of legislation. So a company may have a monopoly, for example, with regard to printing notes and coin in a country, De La Rue, for example, in the UK. Or it may be the case, of course, that the post office in the UK, which previously had the dominant position with regard to deliver of not only letters but also parcels as well, and so that was a legislative source of monopoly power. And today then we're going to be focused on consideration of this third one, which is that substantial fixed costs create a barrier to entry for other firms, and as a consequence the firm which is already in the industry simply they naturally develop a monopoly, hence the term, of course, a natural monopoly. So great examples of natural monopoly would be things where there are very significant infrastructure investment costs. So things like the Channel Tunnel, or simply constructing a railway from the northeast of England to the southeast of England. It wouldn't be sensible, it wouldn't be financially prudent either for there to be, for example, more than one set of railway lines being built from the northeast of England to the south. One would not expect every train operating company to be doing that, because financially it is simply not a viable proposition. You would not expect there to be more than one tunnel connecting the UK to France, because again, that simply would not be financially viable. So it's not possible for more than one firm to fully exploit the economies of scale in a particular industry where a natural monopoly exists. And as a consequence of that, once the firm is already in the industry, i.e., you'll know that we refer to that as the incumbent firm, once they have made that initial investment, huge though it may be, their costs will then be significantly lower than any potential new entrant. And of course, that means that any firm which is already in the industry, should they face the threat of competition from an outsider, they will then be financially able to withstand a reduction in their price, and so they could reduce prices to a level at which a new firm simply could not compete. So the existing firm will always be able to price a new firm out of the market. And so we're saying here that the economies of scale act as a barrier, and they hence create a natural monopoly. Now that has various implications, particularly this whole notion of the fact that even a single firm cannot fully exploit the economies of scale. That has very significant impacts for our diagram, which you can see here. So the construction of this natural monopoly diagram is in many ways very similar to the monopoly diagram. So we have the downward sloping AR curve, which you can see here, our demand curve, and hence we also have the downward sloping marginal revenue curve. However, because it is not possible even for one single firm to fully exploit the economies of scale, the long-run average cost curve, which is this one, unlike it being U-shaped, you may not be able to see that, unlike it being U-shaped, as you'll be familiar with perfect competition, monopolistic competition, monopoly and so on, in natural monopoly, the long-run aggregate cost curve is downward sloping continuously. the long run average cost curve, should I say, is downward sloping continuously because it's not possible for one firm to fully exploit all of the economies of scale. There is always potential to improve upon and to develop those economies of scale and hence reduce your costs. So the long run average cost curve, the LRAC, slopes downwards continuously, and so that is this curve here. That also has implications for our marginal cost curve. So for example, let's say that we build a new railway line from Newcastle to the southeast of England. That would be an enormous initial investment. The costs would be enormous. However, once built, the marginal costs of carrying one additional passenger, so that marginal cost in that case, would be very small. And consequently, the marginal cost curve, the LRMC on this diagram, they slope downwards, but they are beneath the long run average cost curve. So this is our long run marginal costs here. So you'll be familiar, I'm sure by now, as my students are, because I keep harping on about it all the time. What is the profit maximizing output rule for a firm? Where does a firm maximize its profits? You really do need to get this into your heads. Firms are maximized, maximization, profit maximization arises where MC is equal to MR. And so we would go through the usual rigmarole in this diagram of finding that position. So there's the long run marginal costs, there's the MR curve, so there's our profit maximizing level of output in a natural monopoly. So Q and M, so the output in the natural monopoly. What would the price be? Again, remember, where does the pricing decision, the price point come from? It always comes from the demand curve. So take this line up to the demand curve, your AR curve, take it across to your y-axis, and there is your price for the natural monopoly. Then we want to know, obviously, are we making normal, abnormal or subnormal profit? So we need to find the costs. So the costs, obviously, as with previous examples of competition diagrams, the costs come from the cost curve. So there's the costs, take them across, C and M. And so we have this rectangular hashed area here, ladies and gentlemen. And those of you who've done the other diagrams with regard to competitive market structures, you will know that that area, that hashed area, is an area of abnormal profit. I'm not going to label it as such here. Now, if the government were to attempt to break this up and to make this more competitive, there would be problems. And this is really getting to the nub of your analysis with regard to natural monopoly. In any exam that you will be asked, tell me why, tell us as examiners, tell us why it's very difficult to introduce competitive pressures and competitive structures into natural monopoly. And this is why, of course, ladies and gentlemen, for example, the UK railway industry, which was a nationalised industry that is owned by the state, it has been privatised, but there have been all sorts of problems with the privatisation of it, and we as a nation still contribute billions through our taxes, through our subsidy, into this so-called privatised industry. Well, what happens? You want to introduce competition, so you want to be producing a pricing system where price is more equal to marginal cost. Remember, under the theory of the firm, in perfectly competitive markets, that's what we want to see. We want to see price equal to marginal cost, which of course is allocatively efficient. If you were to do that on this diagram, you would encounter a problem. Where does price equal marginal cost? It's at this point here, where marginal costs cut the demand curve. So that's our PMC, that's our marginal cost price, and that's our marginal cost level of output. However, ladies and gentlemen, that creates a problem for us, because what are the costs of producing at that level of output? Well, to get to the costs, we need to take this dashed line up to the cost curve and then across to the y-axis. So that's our costs. Now, as you can quite clearly see here, and no doubt you've probably reached the conclusion already before getting to the end of this, the problem here is that your costs, the CMC, are greater than your revenues. Costs greater than revenues, or cost greater than price. And as a consequence of that, it's very, very difficult, obviously, to introduce competitive market pressures into a market structure which is a natural monopoly, because in so doing, you're asking firms to operate at a price at which their revenues will not cover their costs. And we see this clearly with the real privatisation, where we as taxpayers are still handing out billions of pounds every year to fund a so-called privatised industry. So that's it, ladies and gentlemen, on natural monopoly. See you next time.